Karen had always been the kind of person who lived life on her own terms. She wasn't reckless exactly, just someone who enjoyed taking risks and pushing limits, often without thinking too far ahead. Her friends called her fearless. Others might have described her as impulsive. Either way, Karen's adventurous spirit was what made her stand out in a crowd. It was also what landed her in situations most people would avoid at all costs. On this particular day, Karen found herself wandering through the streets of London, camera slung over one shoulder and a map clutched loosely in hand. The city buzzed with energy, its blend of history and modernity creating an atmosphere that felt both familiar and foreign. Karen loved it. Every corner seemed to hold a new surprise, from street performers juggling fire to centuries-old buildings whispering secrets of the past. But nothing intrigued her more than Buckingham Palace. She had seen pictures of the palace countless times before, its grand facade, sprawling gardens, and iconic guards dressed in their bright red tunics and tall bearskin hats. Today, though, she wanted to experience it firsthand. As she approached the gates, Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. There were tourists everywhere, snapping photos and pointing excitedly at the royal guards stationed outside. These guards, stoic and unmovable, stood like statues, their expressions unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Karen joined the throng of visitors, marveling at how perfectly still the guards remained despite the chaos swirling around them. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking why the guards didn't move or talk. Some tourists tried to get creative with their selfies, posing dramatically near the guards while making funny faces. Others whispered jokes about how robotic they looked. Karen chuckled along with the crowd, finding humor in the scene. But then something shifted inside her, a spark of mischief ignited. What if she could break the guards' composure just for a second? Wouldn't that be hilarious? The thought danced playfully in her mind, growing stronger with each passing moment. After all, everyone knew these guards weren't allowed to react, right? They were trained professionals whose job was to stay completely focused no matter what happened. Surely grabbing their rifle wouldn't hurt anyone, it was just a harmless prank, wasn't it? Karen glanced at her friends who were busy taking pictures nearby. "Hey," she said, nudging one of them. "Watch this." Without waiting for a response, she stepped closer to the nearest guard, her heart racing with excitement. Up close, the guard looked even taller and more imposing than she'd imagined. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection. The rifle resting against his shoulder gleamed under the sunlight, adding to the aura of authority surrounding him. For a brief moment, Karen hesitated. Was she really going to do this? Her rational side screamed at her to stop, reminding her that messing with a royal guard was probably not the smartest idea. But her impulsive nature won out. With a mischievous grin, she reached out and grabbed the rifle, yanking it slightly as if testing its weight. The guard didn't budge, not even a twitch. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and piercing, sending a sudden wave of unease through her body. At first, Karen laughed nervously, expecting the crowd to join in. Maybe someone would clap or cheer, impressed by her boldness. Instead, silence fell over the area. Tourists froze mid-step, their cameras lowered in confusion. Then, almost instantly, alarms began blaring. Loudspeakers crackled to life, issuing urgent commands in stern voices. Before Karen could process what was happening, security personnel rushed toward her, shouting orders and gesturing wildly. Panic surged through her veins as she realized her little prank had spiraled out of control. Dropping the rifle, she raised her hands instinctively, stammering apologies as officers surrounded her. The once stoic guard now stood flanked by reinforcements, his expression unchanged but his presence amplified by the commotion unfolding around him. Karen's mind raced. Hadn't she just been joking around? Why did everyone look so serious as she was led away? Handcuffs clicking tightly around her wrists, Karen replayed the events in her head. She hadn't meant any harm. It was supposed to be fun, a light-hearted moment to share with her friends. Yet now, she faced the very real possibility of facing consequences far beyond anything she'd ever imagined. The irony wasn't lost on her in trying to entertain herself. She had become the center of attention, but not in the way she'd hoped. Back at the station, Karen sat alone in a small, sterile room, her earlier bravado replaced by fear and regret. Outside, news vans gathered like vultures, eager to capture footage of the woman who dared to disrupt one of Britain's most sacred traditions. Reporters speculated wildly about her motives, painting her as either a clueless tourist or a potential threat to national security. Meanwhile, Karen struggled to come to terms with the magnitude of her actions. How had such a simple decision spiraled into something so terrifying? Though the full extent of her punishment was yet to be determined, Karen knew one thing for certain. This experience would leave a lasting mark on her life. Whether it became a cautionary tale or a lesson in redemption remained to be seen. But one thing was clear: she would never look at a royal guard the same way again. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as the alarms blared louder, each shrill note piercing through the air like a warning siren. The once calm atmosphere of Buckingham Palace grounds had transformed into chaos within seconds. Tourists scrambled to get out of the way, some clutching their cameras tightly while others shielded their children, unsure of what was happening. Security personnel moved with precision, their faces grim and focused. It was as if Karen had triggered a chain reaction she couldn't possibly have anticipated. The guard whose rifle she had grabbed remained eerily still, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach churn. He hadn't moved an inch since she'd touched the weapon, but now he seemed less like a statue and more like a silent sentinel guarding something far greater than herself. Around him, other guards shifted into defensive positions, forming a protective circle. Their movements were coordinated, almost choreographed, as though they had rehearsed this exact scenario countless times before. Karen suddenly realized just how serious this situation was, and how small she felt in comparison. Before she could even process what was happening, two officers rushed toward her, their voices sharp and commanding. "Step away from the guard," one shouted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Karen froze, her hands trembling as she took a hesitant step back. She wanted to explain, to tell them it was all a joke, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she stammered, I didn't mean anything by it, I thought it was funny." Her attempt at explanation fell flat. No one laughed. No one smiled. If anything, her words only heightened the tension. Another officer barked orders, instructing her to place her hands on her head. Karen obeyed instinctively, her mind racing with questions. Why were they treating her like a criminal? Wasn't this just a harmless prank? As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, cold metal pressing against her skin, reality began to sink in. This wasn't going to blow over quickly. The scene around her continued to escalate. More security personnel arrived, their presence overwhelming. Some carried radios, speaking urgently into them in clipped tones. Others scanned the crowd, searching for any signs of additional threats. To Karen's horror, she noticed several armed officers moving into position, their weapons drawn and ready. Her breath hitched in her throat. Were they really prepared to use force over something as trivial as grabbing a rifle? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her body. As she was led away from the gates, Karen glanced back at the crowd. Faces stared at her, some shocked, others angry, and a few visibly frightened. Parents pulled their children close, whispering reassurances or explanations she couldn't hear. A group of teenagers near the edge of the crowd snickered nervously, pointing at her as if she were part of some bizarre spectacle. Karen wanted to scream at them, to tell them she wasn't some reckless troublemaker, but her voice failed her. All she could do was walk, flanked by officers who treated her like a dangerous suspect rather than a confused tourist. The journey to the nearby police station felt endless. Inside the patrol car, Karen sat hunched forward, her cuffed hands resting awkwardly on her lap. Her thoughts swirled chaotically. How had things gone so wrong so fast? Back home, people often joked about breaking rules or doing silly things for fun. Nobody ever got arrested for it, or at least, not like this. She replayed the moment in her mind, reaching out for the rifle, feeling its weight, laughing nervously, when nothing happened. It had seemed so innocent at the time. Now it felt like the biggest mistake of her life. At the station, the interrogation began almost immediately. Officers questioned her relentlessly, demanding to know why she had touched The rifle. Whether she had planned the act and if she had any connections to extremist groups. Each question hit her like a punch, leaving her stunned and disoriented. Karen struggled to keep up, her answers stumbling out in fragments. "It was just a joke," she repeated over and over again, her voice growing weaker with each repetition. But the officers didn't seem convinced. They exchanged skeptical glances, scribbling notes furiously as they pressed her for more details. To make matters worse, news outlets picked up the story faster than Karen could have imagined. Within hours, headlines screamed across social media, platforms and television screens. Tourist arrested after grabbing Royal Guard's rifle. Videos of the incident circulated widely, showing Karen's nervous laugh and the immediate aftermath. Comment sections erupted with outrage, ridicule, and disbelief. Some accused her of being disrespectful. Others labeled her actions as downright dangerous. Strangers dissected every detail, speculating about her motives and mental state. By the time night fell, Karen's name was trending worldwide, a dubious honor she never wanted. Back in the interrogation room, Karen finally broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain herself one last time. "I didn't think it would be such a big deal," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, I swear." The officers listened silently, their expressions unreadable. One of them offered her a tissue, but there was no warmth in the gesture. It was clear they viewed her as a liability, a potential threat to national security, no matter how unintentional her actions might have been. By the end of the night, Karen was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She had spent hours answering questions, reliving the incident and grappling with the consequences of her impulsive decision. As she sat alone in a holding cell waiting for further instructions, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her here. What had possessed her to grab that rifle? Why hadn't she stopped herself when she saw the guards' unwavering gaze? And most importantly, how was she going to fix this? Sleep eluded her as the hours dragged on. Outside, the city buzzed with activity, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside the station walls. Reporters camped outside, eager for updates. Lawyers were called in, discussions held behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Karen sat in silence, staring at the cold, gray walls of her cell. For the first time in her life, she truly understood the weight of her actions and the terrifying ripple effects they could create. The days that followed Karen's arrest felt like a blur, a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and sleepless nights. What started as a seemingly harmless prank had spiraled into something far more serious, and Karen was now at the center of an international incident. Every decision she made or failed to make was dissected under a microscope, not just by authorities but also by millions of people around the world who had seen her story unfold on their screens. Karen's first court appearance came sooner than she expected. Dressed in borrowed clothes from the station, her hair unkempt and her face pale with exhaustion, she shuffled into the courtroom flanked by two stern-looking officers. The room buzzed with activity, reporters scribbling notes, lawyers whispering strategies, and spectators craning their necks for a glimpse of the woman who had dared to disrupt one of Britain's most iconic traditions. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse, capturing every step Karen took as if she were some kind of celebrity. But this was no glamorous red carpet. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The judge, a tall man with sharp features and an even sharper gaze, wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. Prosecutors laid out their case with precision, painting Karen's actions as reckless and dangerous. They argued that touching a Royal Guard's rifle wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was a potential threat to national security. After all, Buckingham Palace wasn't just a tourist attraction, it was a symbol of sovereignty, protected by layers of safeguards designed to prevent any kind of disruption. By grabbing the rifle, Karen had crossed a line that few dared to approach. Her defense team worked tirelessly to counter these claims, emphasizing that Karen's intentions were never malicious. This was an impulsive act, her lawyer argued, his voice calm but firm. A momentary lapse in judgment, yes, but certainly not an attempt to harm anyone or undermine authority. He highlighted her lack of prior criminal record and her otherwise unremarkable life as evidence of her good character. But even he couldn't deny the seriousness of the situation. The fact remained that Karen had violated strict rules and the consequences would reflect that. As the hearing progressed, Karen listened intently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, to apologize again, but her lawyers advised against it. Instead, she sat quietly, absorbing every word, every accusation, every rebuttal. At times, she felt overwhelmed by guilt, wondering how she could have been so careless. Other times, anger bubbled beneath the surface. Why did everyone treat this as such a monumental offense? Couldn't they see it was just a stupid mistake? Outside the courtroom, public opinion raged on. Social media platforms became battlegrounds, with users fiercely debating whether Karen deserved sympathy or scorn. Some defended her, pointing out that she was simply a tourist unfamiliar with local customs. Others condemned her actions, labeling her entitled and disrespectful. Memes mocking her circulated widely, turning her into both a punchline and a cautionary tale. Friends back home reached out offering support, but many distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone embroiled in such controversy. Meanwhile, Karen's family scrambled to help however they could. Her parents, devastated by the news, flew to London immediately. They hired top-notch lawyers hoping to mitigate the damage and ensure Karen received fair treatment. Sitting beside her in the courtroom, they held her hand tightly, offering silent reassurance. Still, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she had let them down. Growing up, she had always been the adventurous one, the child who pushed boundaries and embraced challenges. But this was different. This wasn't just about her anymore. It affected everyone connected to her. Behind the scenes, investigators dug deeper into Karen's background, leaving no stone unturned. They reviewed her travel history, social media posts, and personal connections, searching for any hint of ulterior motives. While they ultimately found nothing suspicious, the process added another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. For Karen, it felt like being under constant surveillance, as though her entire life was being scrutinized for answers she didn't have. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure mounted. Court dates stretched on, each session bringing new revelations and renewed criticism. Karen began attending mandatory counseling sessions as part of her bail conditions, where she explored the psychology behind impulsive behavior. Her counselor, a kind yet firm woman named Dr. Patel, encouraged Karen to reflect on her choices and consider their broader implications. Actions have consequences, Dr. Patel reminded her gently during one session. Even when we don't intend harm, our decisions can ripple outward, affecting others in ways we might not anticipate. These conversations forced Karen to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. She realized that her desire for excitement often overshadowed her ability to think critically. In the past, her impulsiveness had led to minor mishaps. A missed flight here, a forgotten deadline there, but nothing remotely close to this scale. Now she faced the harsh reality that her actions had real-world consequences, ones that extended far beyond her own life. Amidst the chaos, Karen also began to notice moments of unexpected kindness. A few strangers sent messages of encouragement, reminding her that everyone makes mistakes. One elderly woman wrote to her, sharing a story about her own youthful indiscretion and how it shaped her later years. "We learn through experience," the letter read. "Don't let this define you forever." These small gestures gave Karen hope, reminding her that redemption was possible, even if the road ahead seemed daunting. By the time the final verdict approached, Karen felt drained but determined. She had spent countless hours reflecting on her actions, apologizing publicly, and working to demonstrate genuine remorse. Her lawyers presented evidence of her efforts, hoping to sway the judge toward leniency. And while Karen knew she couldn't undo what had happened, she vowed to use this experience as a turning point, a chance to grow and become someone better. When the judge delivered his ruling, Karen braced herself for the worst. To her relief, he acknowledged her lack of malice and willingness to take responsibility. However, he emphasized the importance of accountability, stressing that even seemingly minor infractions could undermine systems designed to protect society. In the end, Karen was sentenced to several months of community service along with mandatory educational programs focused on cultural sensitivity and responsible behavior. Jail time was avoided, but the weight of the punishment still hung heavily over her. Leaving the courtroom that day, Karen felt a mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, shame, and resolve. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust with her family, her friends, and the wider public would take time. But for the first time since the incident, she felt a glimmer of optimism. This ordeal had taught her a painful but valuable lesson: that freedom comes with responsibility and respect for boundaries is non-negotiable. As she stepped out into the fresh air, blinking against the bright sunlight, Karen promised herself, and the world, that she would do better. Karen's sentence marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one filled with challenges, reflection, and an opportunity to make amends. The court's decision to spare her jail time came as a relief, but it didn't erase the weight of her actions. Community service and mandatory educational programs awaited her, tasks that would force her to confront not only her own behavior, but also the broader impact of her choices. It was a daunting prospect, but Karen knew she had no choice but to face it head-on. Her first day of community service took place at a local food bank in London. At first, Karen felt out of place among the volunteers, many of whom were seasoned, pros accustomed to the rhythm of sorting donations, packing boxes, and serving meals. She stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure where to start or how to contribute. A kind volunteer named Margaret noticed her hesitation and approached with a warm smile. "Don't worry," Margaret said gently. "We'll show you the ropes." As Karen learned the basics, stacking cans, organizing shelves, and assisting families in need, she began to see the value of her work. Each box of food represented more than just supplies. It symbolized hope for those struggling to make ends meet. For the first time in weeks, Karen felt a sense of purpose. Helping others gave her a chance to channel her energy into something positive, something meaningful. Though she still carried the burden of her past mistake, these small acts of kindness offered a glimmer of redemption. The educational programs, however, proved to be a different kind of challenge. Designed to teach cultural sensitivity and responsible behavior, they pushed Karen to examine her mindset and understand why her actions had caused such outrage. One session focused on the history of Buckingham Palace and the role of the royal guards. Through lectures and discussions, Karen gained insight into the traditions and protocols she had so carelessly disregarded. She realized now that the guards weren't just symbols of authority, they were human beings entrusted with protecting something far greater than themselves. Another program explored the concept of privilege and responsibility. Facilitators encouraged participants to reflect on their own backgrounds and consider how their actions might affect people from different walks of life. For Karen, this hit close to home. As a tourist visiting a foreign country, she had taken certain freedoms for granted, freedoms that weren't always extended to locals or visitors from less privileged circumstances. This realization struck a chord within her. She thought about all the times she had acted without considering the bigger picture, assuming her intentions would justify her behavior. Now, she understood that good intentions alone weren't enough. Between her community service and educational sessions, Karen found herself reflecting deeply on her identity and values. Back home, she had always prided herself on being adventurous and spontaneous, but those traits had often led her to overlook boundaries. In hindsight, she saw that her impulsiveness wasn't harmless fun. It was selfishness disguised as excitement. This epiphany was painful but necessary. It forced her to ask difficult questions. Who did she want to be? How could she ensure that her future actions aligned with her desire to grow and improve? To answer these questions, Karen turned to journaling. Every evening after a long day of volunteering or attending workshops, she wrote down her thoughts. Some entries expressed frustration at herself, at the system, at the media coverage that continued to haunt her. Others revealed moments of gratitude, like when a family thanked her for helping them select groceries at the food bank. Over time, her journal became a record of her transformation, a testament to her commitment to change. Karen's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Margaret, her mentor at the food bank, began to trust her with more responsibilities. Other volunteers warmed up to her, sharing stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Even the facilitators of her educational programs acknowledged her progress, praising her willingness to engage in difficult conversations and learn from her mistakes. These small victories gave Karen the confidence to keep moving forward, even when the road felt uncertain. Outside of her structured obligations, Karen sought additional ways to give back. She started volunteering at a nearby shelter for homeless youth, teaching basic skills like cooking and budgeting. Many of the young people she worked with reminded her of herself, young, eager, and full of potential, but they faced obstacles she could barely imagine. Listening to their stories opened her eyes to the resilience required to overcome adversity. It also reinforced her determination to use her second chance wisely. Despite her growth, Karen couldn't escape the lingering shadow of public scrutiny. News outlets occasionally revisited her story, reminding readers of the tourist who grabbed a Royal Guard's rifle. Social media remained a minefield, with trolls mocking her and critics questioning whether she deserved forgiveness. On particularly tough days, Karen considered retreating into isolation, avoiding the world altogether. But then she remembered Margaret's advice. You can't control what others say about you, but you can control how you respond. So Karen chose to focus on what mattered most, her actions. She began speaking publicly about her experience, sharing her story at schools, community centers, and online platforms. Her talks emphasized the importance of respecting boundaries, thinking before acting, and learning from mistakes. Audiences listened intently, moved by her honesty and vulnerability. Younger listeners especially resonated with her message, seeing themselves in her journey of self-discovery. One particularly memorable event took place at a high school in London. After delivering her speech, Karen fielded questions from students curious about her ordeal. One boy raised his hand hesitantly and asked, "Do you ever feel like giving up?" Karen paused, considering the question carefully. "Yes," she admitted. "There are days when it feels easier to quit. But I remind myself that every step forward matters, no matter how small. If I can help even one person avoid making the same mistakes I did, then it's worth it." By the end of her community service and educational programs, Karen had transformed in ways she never anticipated. She wasn't the same carefree traveler who had once laughed off boundaries and consequences. Instead, she emerged as someone grounded in empathy, accountability, and purpose. While the scars of her past decision would always remain, they served as reminders of how far she had come and how much further she could go. As Karen packed up her belongings on her final day of service, Margaret handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing us that everyone deserves a second chance. Keep shining your light." Tears welled up in Karen's eyes as she hugged Margaret tightly. For the first time in months, she felt truly hopeful, not because her past had been erased, but because her future was hers to shape. Karen's journey toward redemption didn't end with the completion of her community service or her educational programs. In fact, those milestones were just the beginning of a much larger transformation, one that would define not only her personal growth but also her impact on others. As she stepped away from the structured obligations imposed by the court, Karen found herself standing at a crossroads. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months she felt ready to carve out her own direction. With her newfound clarity and perspective, Karen decided to dedicate herself fully to creating positive change. She returned home from London with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to turn her embarrassing mistake into an opportunity to inspire others. Her first step was to share her story more widely, using platforms like social media and public speaking engagements to reach audiences beyond the confines of schools and community centers. At first, this idea terrified her. Facing crowds who knew about her infamous rifle grab incident meant confronting judgment and criticism head-on. But Karen reminded herself of something Margaret had once said: "Growth happens when we face our fears." Her first major talk took place at a local library, where she stood nervously in front of a modest audience of about 30 people. Clutching her notes tightly, Karen began by recounting the events at Buckingham Palace, the impulsiveness, the chaos, the consequences, and how they had shaken her to her core. She spoke candidly about the guilt and shame she had felt during her arrest and trial, as well as the lessons she had learned through her sentence. By the time she finished, many in the audience were visibly moved, nodding along or wiping away tears. Afterward, several attendees approached her to express their gratitude. One woman shared how Karen's honesty had inspired her to reflect on her own life choices. Another man admitted he had judged Karen harshly after seeing news reports, but now saw her as someone who had grown from her mistakes. These moments of connection fueled Karen's resolve to keep sharing her story, even when it felt uncomfortable or vulnerable. As word spread about her talks, invitations poured in from organizations eager to hear her speak. Schools invited her to address students about impulse control and respect for authority. Nonprofits asked her to lead workshops on accountability and cultural sensitivity. Even corporations reached out, interested in incorporating her message into employee training sessions. With each new opportunity, Karen refined her approach, tailoring her presentations to resonate with diverse audiences while staying true to her core message. That mistakes are inevitable, but what matters most is how we choose to grow from them. To amplify her reach, Karen launched a blog titled Second Chances, where she documented her ongoing journey of self-improvement and offered advice to readers navigating their own challenges. Posts ranged from practical tips, how to apologize sincerely, to deeply personal reflections, what I learned about humility. Over time, the blog gained traction, attracting followers from around the world who appreciated Karen's authenticity and vulnerability. Some readers even reached out privately, sharing their own stories of regret and redemption. These exchanges reinforced Karen's belief that everyone has the capacity to learn, grow, and rebuild trust, no matter how daunting the task may seem. But Karen didn't stop there. Inspired by her work at the food bank and homeless shelter, in London she founded a non-profit organization aimed at supporting individuals seeking second chances. Called Fresh Starts, the initiative provided resources such as job training, mentorship programs, and mental health counseling to help participants reintegrate into society successfully. Karen poured her heart and soul into building the organization, collaborating with experts in various fields to ensure its effectiveness. Within its first year, Fresh Starts helped dozens of individuals secure stable employment, housing, and education opportunities. Despite her successes, Karen remained acutely aware of the lingering stigma attached to her name. News outlets occasionally revisited her story, often framing it as a cautionary tale rather than a narrative of growth. Online trolls continued to mock her, leaving cruel comments beneath photos or articles about her work. On days when negativity threatened to overwhelm her, Karen leaned on her support system, her family, friends, and mentors like Margaret, who reminded her of the progress she had made and encouraged her to stay focused on her mission. One particularly challenging moment came when a television network invited her to appear on a popular morning show. The producers pitched the segment as an opportunity for Karen to discuss her transformation and promote fresh starts. However, during rehearsals, she discovered that the host planned to focus heavily on her past mistake, peppering her with questions designed to elicit drama rather than insight. Frustrated but unwilling to back down, Karen negotiated with the team to shift the conversation toward her current efforts instead. When the cameras rolled, she spoke passionately about the importance of forgiveness not just from others but from oneself, and urged viewers to embrace second chances. The segment aired to mixed reactions, but it ultimately strengthened Karen's reputation as someone committed to making a difference. Over time, Karen's hard work paid off in ways she never imagined. Fresh Starts expanded its services, partnering with government agencies and private donors to increase its impact. Her blog evolved into a podcast, allowing her to connect with listeners globally and feature guest speakers who had overcome adversity. And though she still encountered occasional criticism, Karen no longer let it define her. Instead, she viewed it as proof that she was pushing boundaries and challenging societal norms, a sign that her message was resonating. Looking back on her journey, Karen marveled at how far she had come. From the impulsive tourist who thought grabbing a Royal Guards rifle was harmless fun to the advocate for accountability and second chances, she had transformed in ways she never thought possible. Yet she knew her work was far from over. There would always be room for growth, both personally and collectively. For Karen, the key lay in continuing to ask tough questions, listen openly, and act with integrity. In the final analysis, Karen's story became less about the mistake itself, and more about what followed. It served as a powerful reminder that actions have consequences, but so do apologies, effort, and perseverance. By choosing to rise above her circumstances, Karen proved that even the most embarrassing missteps can lead to meaningful change. And as she looked toward the future, she carried with her not just the weight of her past but also the hope of endless possibilities.